Good morning, Royal We Fellowship. Welcome, everybody. Those of you who are new, I'm so happy that you are here. Shabbat Shalom. We are continuing on in our story of Jacob right now and how it pertains to us and what we can learn about narcissistic abuse and how to protect yourself and how to get out. And today, this message is part 2 of Genesis chapter 31, and we have a lot to uncover about how to react and respond in the face of adversity, especially when it comes to narcissism and narcissistic abuse. Let us go ahead and open up in prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, how holy is your name, and your kingdom will come, and your will shall be done, here on this earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day and each and every day our daily bread, and forgive us of our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. Lead us not into temptation, and deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. And everybody says, amen. Now, before we continue, if you are new to Royal We Fellowship, welcome. If you would like to support Royal We Fellowship, please do. You can find the PayPal link on the description box down below or on the channel banner. And your support is not required, but inspired. If you are inspired to see the Royal We Fellowship grow, please be a part of that. Now, as I said, we are in part 2 of Genesis chapter 31. And this is an interesting thing because we're seeing Jacob in the face of narcissistic abuse from his in-laws. This is something that resonates with me, particularly, especially with the way in which Jacob finally up and left the situation. And I myself experienced that exact same situation of just up and leaving, causing significant damage to the narcissist. And as we're going to find out in the story of Genesis 31 in the second half that we're going to get into, we're going to see the intent of Labon, who is the father-in-law of Jacob. We're going to see the intent of hostility, anger, and aggression born out of his narcissism as he pursues Jacob to inflict harm for no reason other than the fact that Jacob left. And this is a very telling story of how narcissists view us and view themselves in our lives and why it's so difficult for them to let us go and why they turn to violence and even hostility. So let me start off by reading a couple of things here before we get into verse 31. I want to share with you uh, uh, a saying from Ambrose of Milan in 397 AD about this very chapter and this very situation. It says this: now let us consider how the just person ought to behave if enmity arises, enmity with another person. First, let him avoid it. Okay, now we all know this. We try our best to avoid enmity with other people. We try our best to avoid enmity with narcissists and with toxic people. Avoiding means you stay away from them. You go no contact, you stay away from it. But there's a second part that's very interesting. And he says this: it is better to go away without strife than to settle down with contention. Now, anytime you try to settle with a narcissistic person, anytime you try to settle with a toxic person in any kind of relationship, you are settling with strife. We have to stop looking at it as we are trying to be light in darkness. If you settle in a toxic situation for any reason, you're settling with strife. And even Ambrose of Milan writes and says it is better to go away without strife than to settle down with contention. Next, this is number 2. We need to understand this. Let him or her possess a property that he or she can carry off with themselves, right? So that he cannot be held under any obligation by the adversary, but may say, identify whatever of yours I may have. All right. I'll end it right there. According to what Ambrose was saying, he's saying we need to make sure that we have our own things. And this is important because on the Royal We, for those of you who know, I do take a lot of appointments and consultations. One of the biggest things that people have a hard time of getting away from narcissists and toxic people is they don't have anything for themselves. They don't have anything that they've earned. Everything that they have, they've kind of given up everything, finances, all kinds of stuff, over to the power of narcissists, in which case they find themselves trapped and obligated. So it's important to work to have your own means of transportation, your own means of a place to live, your own means of work, your own means. And this is important. And this is what Ambrose and Milan was saying. Number one, again, what he's saying is that, whoops. The first thing is avoid it. And the second thing is make sure you have your own means. Now let's get into chapter 31, part 2. So now we know that Jacob had left his father-in-law, Labon. He had taken his belongings and his wife's. His wives are the daughters of Labon. And by being instructed by the Lord, he got his belongings together and just left. Did not tell Labon that when exactly he was leaving. Now, he did mention that he was planning to go back to his home area. He told Labon that, but at this point, he did not say exactly when. And so, like someone escaping in the night, he got up, and Jacob got his stuff together, and he left. And now, this is where Laban's sons told him, hey, he left, he stole your stuff, this and that. And Labon was furious and pursued after Jacob. All right. And now here we are, chapter 31. We're beginning in verse 25. That's what we're picking up today. Verse 25, chapter 31. Jacob had pitched his tent in the hill country of Gilead when Labon overtook him, meaning Labon caught up to Jacob. And Labon and his relatives camped there too. So they probably camped at a distance from Jacob, so Jacob did not yet know that they were there. Verse 26, then Labon said to Jacob, what have you done? So Jacob had probably the next day, or Labon had probably the next day approached Jacob, surprised him, and said, what have you done? You've deceived me. This is Labon talking. You deceived me. Why didn't you tell me so that you were leaving, so I could send you away with joy and singing to the music of timbrels and harps? You didn't even let me kiss my grandchildren and my daughters goodbye. You have done a foolish thing. I have the power to harm you. But last night, the God of your father said to me, be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad. Now you have gone off because you long to return to your father's household. But why did you steal my gods? So let's look at this narrative here. This is so telling of the narcissistic personality that we see Labon that overtook Labon. First of all, let's look at why Labon is mad and angry. It's summarized in the first part of this. The first part is this. Why did you leave without telling me you were going? This is what caused the narcissistic injury. This is what infuriated Labon. How dare somebody let me know that I have no control over them? This is exactly what had taken place. Jacob took his belongings. He didn't steal anything. His wives are his wives. He not only married them and made a covenant with them with God, but he also worked and served Labon in order to take ownership. And when you become married, you're unified, you become one. They're no longer Laban's. So there's no stealing there. All the cattle that Jacob had with him belonged to Jacob per agreement and per working. Jacob had every right to take everything that he took and leave. And so Labon is not angry that Jacob he's not really pursuing him because of the stolen gods here. This is the point. Notice that it's a very small part of it at the last bit of this entire segment. The real reason he chased him is this. Why did you run off secretly and deceive me? That causes narcissistic injury. Why did you go without telling me you were going to go? And then in a typical narcissistic fashion, we see how Labon is lying. Why didn't you tell me so I can send you away with joy and singing? Now, how many of you are aware that Labon was not going to send Jacob away with singing and with myrrh or with any of this stuff? Labon would have found any way to make Jacob stay where Labon had control over his life, over all the possessions. And this is how narcissists act in your life as well. I experienced this myself. I took my family, I up and left California. And I know that what narcissistic people we left behind would have said is, why didn't you let us know so we could have had a party? We could have seen you guys off. they wouldn't have seen us off. They would have had nothing good to say about our leaving except ill comments of saying things of how foolish it is to leave and how are you going to make. And Labon would have done the same thing. What this type of narcissistic injury is a lack of control. When a narcissist realizes that they can't control things and make people stay, and he was losing ownership of Jacob, he was losing it. He went mad. His narcissism kicked in, and he had a narcissistic injury, and that was the reason he pursued Jacob. And by the time he caught up with him, and he said all this spiel, you left me, you caused narcissistic injury, my feelings are hurt, you showed me that I have no control over you, and you've done a foolish thing. How dare you? I have the power to harm you, he says. Now, fortunately for Jacob, God intervened. And there's a reason why God was able to intervene. The reason God was able to intervene is because Jacob actually did nothing wrong. This is important for you to understand as you leave a toxic relationship. If you don't do anything wrong, it's so important that we do not try to take revenge on narcissists. We do not try to hurt them. We do not try. We just up and leave, because the just in you, in leaving, that justness will protect you. And in this case, it did. God visited Labon in a dream and said, be careful not to do anything to Jacob. Labon knew that he had nothing on Jacob. Jacob did nothing wrong. He told him that he was going to leave at some point. He took what was his own belongings and left. What could Labon do? Except Labon was hanging on to this one excuse, this one reason, and it said this, but why did you steal my gods? You stole something from me. And this is the reason that he's using to have caught up to him, right? So we saw the real reason Labon is angry, but now we see the excuse that Labon is using to take out his narcissistic rage. And narcissists need to do this. They will not just rest on the real reason. They'll say it, but then they'll use an excuse to cause harm. The excuse here was stealing of the gods. And I'm going to read something also that John Chrysostom talks about as far as stealing the gods, because this is very interesting. John says this, what extraordinary folly we see from Labon. What kind of gods are these of yours that can be stolen? Aren't you ashamed to say, why did you steal my household gods? See the extraordinary extent of Labon's self-deception, such that people endowed with reason should worship wood and stone. This goes into talk about the self-deception of narcissists. And this is, their gods are on the things of this earth, which listen, his gods, this is the self-deception, and this is how deceived Labon is in this whole thing. His stone or wooden gods or whatever it is, they could rot, they can turn to dust, an animal can come by and eat them, and they'd be gone. So it's foolish that he's even making this argument, you took my gods and I'm mad and I'm going to hurt you. Yet this is what we see narcissists do. Again, it has nothing to do with the taking away of his gods. It has everything to do with not having control. But narcissists will use any excuse. If you do something to their car or their truck, that becomes their god in that moment to exact revenge on you. This is what we're seeing in Labon. Okay, it's important to understand that. Now, how do we see Jacob respond? In verse 31, this is interesting, and we need to understand this. Jacob responded in complete honesty. Now that we see Labon got out his narcissistic rage, and yet he did it in a mild way than what he intended. He intended to hurt Jacob, but was given a strict warning by God. And Jacob knew that he was given this warning by God. He knew that Labon felt powerless and couldn't do anything, and so he responded with honesty. Verse 31, Jacob answered Laban and said, I was afraid of you. I was afraid because I thought you would take your daughters away from me by force. Verse 32, but if you find anyone who has your gods, that person shall not live. So he responded with honesty. He said, Laban, I was afraid of you, that if I stayed, you were eventually going to take your daughters away from me by force. Jacob understood Laban's narcissism. Jacob understood the tensions were rising. Jacob understood by the time God told him, get up and get out, that Laban, in his selfishness and in his narcissism, was planning something bad against Jacob. So Jacob told him that. Jacob basically called his bluff and said, I hear that you saying you wanted to throw a party for me to go and and you wanted to send me away with tambourines and dancing and stuff like that, but I don't believe you. I was afraid because I thought you would take your daughters away from me. So he's being honest. But he also says this: if anybody here has taken your gods, that person shall not live. In the presence of our relatives, see for yourself whether there's anything of yours here with me. And if so, take it. Now, Jacob did not know this, but one of his wives, Rachel, his favorite wife, right? And I've made comments about Rachel before. A lot of people think Rachel is this great, honorable person, but what we've seen of Rachel so far in all of these scriptures is that Rachel has some issues, okay? Rachel was crying and whining when she couldn't have children. She was jealous and envious of her sister Leah, who Jacob didn't even really like as much as Rachel. Now, yet we see Rachel again kind of causing some more problems. We see that Rachel has the propensity to kind of be like her father Labon. She has this mischief side in her. So the reason we know this is because what we didn't realize is that Rachel had stolen her father's gods. Rachel went and took those stone and wooden gods. The intention of Rachel was unclear. It could have been she was angry because she didn't want her father to worship and idolize these gods. On the other side, Rachel could have been mad because her father had no inheritance for them. So it's unclear as to why Rachel took these, but she did. Verse 33, Laban went into Jacob's tent and into Leah's tent and into the tent of the two female servants, but he found nothing. He couldn't find his little gods. After he came out of Leah's tent, he entered Rachel's tent. Now Rachel had taken the household gods and put them inside her camel's saddle and was sitting on them. Laban searched through everything in the tent but found nothing. In verse 35, Rachel said to her father, don't be angry, my lord, that I cannot stand up in your presence. I'm having my period. So he searched but could not find the household gods. Rachel lied to her father. She didn't get off the horse saying, I can't get up because I'm having womanly cycle issues. So she's sitting on basically her father's household gods. Nobody else knew. How many of you are kind of thinking that Rachel is not the person that you once thought, right? And when we look, how many of you remember back when I was talking about the attraction that Jacob had to Rachel? I want to revisit this real quick because it's important. Jacob ran from his house after to get out from under the shadows of his brother Esau. Esau was the favored one. Esau was the man's man, the adventurous one. And when he ran away and he met up with Labon and met up with his daughters and first saw Rachel, what he saw in Rachel was this outgoing, adventurous girl. She was out in the fields with the animals, and he fell in love with that. I do believe that what Jacob fell in love with, because he did not know himself yet, is he fell in love with some of the things that possibly reminded him of his brother, those attributes. How many of you have heard the saying, we're attracted to the opposite? We sometimes, often without even being aware of it, are attracted to those attributes we wish we had, right? Jacob himself was a mama's boy. He was the smart one. Esau was the favored one, his brother, and he lived in the shadows. So when he found Rachel, Rachel was that outgoing one. He was attracted to that which he did not feel he possessed. When he met Leah, it's said in the scriptures that Leah's eyes were weak, and Jacob was not as attracted to her. When I looked at that Hebrew understanding of, or the Hebrew language of the word weak, when it talked about Leah's eyes, what it was really referring to was a lack of experience, a tenderness. Leah was simply more soft, more feminine, more more pure, if you will. And this is what Jacob was not attracted to. I believe that Leah reminded Jacob more of himself. He wasn't attracted to that. As we have seen, Jacob has issues with himself, and this is his journey. And we're going to find out more about Jacob's issue with himself all the way up until he has a run-in with the Lord and a wrestling match, and his name is changed. But at this point, Jacob still is uncomfortable with himself. So is Leah. Rachel was the outgoing one. And here we see Rachel acting up again, taking her father's things. Okay. So it's not over. We see now that Labon hasn't found anything by looking in the tents. He didn't find his small gods, right? So Rachel lied to him in verse 35. Verse 36, Jacob became angry. Now, this is interesting. This is when, after you are honest with narcissists, and now you're in this place where you know you've done nothing wrong, the power dynamic can shift. And when narcissists pursue you, this is when you can question them, and this is what Jacob has done. In verse 36, the balance has shifted, and now Jacob has become angry. And for the first time, Jacob is able to express his anger to Labon, to the narcissist. And Jacob was angry in verse 36 and took Labon to task. How many of you would like to take a narcissist to task in your life? Well, this is how it can be done. Number one, remember the first two rules that we talked about. Number one, avoid their conflict. Avoid narcissists. And number two, make sure you have your own means to survive. Your own transportation, your own house. When you have your own, narcissists have nothing on you. You're not obligated to them. So now when they pursue you, you can say, what are you doing here? This is the reason I left. But then verse 36, Jacob then took Labon to task, took the narcissist to task and says, what is my crime? He asked Labon, how have I wronged you that you have hunted me down? How many of you would like to say that to a narcissistic family member or spouse? How have I wronged you that you are hunting me down? Why won't you leave me alone? This is an amazing transfer of power because of Jacob's innocence in leaving. Verse 37, now that you have searched through all my goods. And here's the other interesting part. Verse 37 says, now that you've searched through all my goods. Jacob allowed Labon to search because Jacob was confident that he did nothing wrong. So I think it goes without saying that when you are in the face of narcissistic enmity, it's okay to allow them to search in their own way if they're accusing you of something. Did I do something? Go ahead. Bring it to my attention. What did I do? And when they come up with nothing, because typically they're making stuff up anyways, that's when you can turn it on the balance and you can take them to task by questioning them. You don't take them to task by yelling and screaming and arguing with them. You take a narcissist to task by questioning them. What is my crime? Why are you here? What do you want? And this is a great way to handle narcissists because they have no answer. Because their answer is, I lost control of you and I'm angry. But they're not going to say that, right? So in verse 36, Jacob became angry and asked Laban, what is my crime? He asked, how have I wronged you that you hunt me down? Now that you have searched through all my goods, what have you found that belongs to your household? Put it here in front of your relatives and mine, and let them judge between the two of us. Love that. I love that transference of power where Jacob is saying, listen, where's your stolen stuff? Did you find it? You searched everything. Did you find it? If you found it, put it here in front so that they can judge. And Jacob's not done with Laban. Jacob is now finally, because of this instant shift of power against Laban, Jacob's finally able to express everything that's in his heart. Verse 38, he says, I have been with you for 20 years now. Your sheep and goats have not miscarried, nor have I eaten rams from your flocks. I did not bring you animals torn by wild beasts. I bore the loss myself, and you demanded payment from me for whatever was stolen by day or night. This was my situation. The heat consumed me in the daytime, and the cold at night, and the sleep fled from my eyes. Now we're getting into Jacob's situation with Laban, and it's horrific. The way in which Jacob was treated. We see that Jacob did nothing but serve Laban to the point of suffering any losses. If there was an animal that was eaten by a wild beast, Jacob took that loss, not Laban, even if it was one of Laban's animals. Jacob said, I gave you one of mine, and I took the loss. But look at this also. This was my situation. The heat consumed me in the day. Jacob saying, you offered me no protection from the sun. You didn't let me have a place to stay. You put me out in the fields when I was trying to work for your daughters, and you made me stay out there in the scorching sun day after day. And the cold at night. You didn't bring me in and offer me warmth by your fireplace, Laban. You treated me horribly. I worked for you 14 years. He goes on to say, the sleep fled from my eyes. So Jacob is saying, I didn't even sleep well. We didn't know all this, but this is Jacob's condition as he was working hard to earn the rights to the daughters and as he served Laban. And how many of you have felt this way in toxic relationships? You gave and suffered a lot. And then yet still they can't let you go. Verse 41, it was like this for 20 years, and I was in your household. I worked for you 14 years for your 2 daughters and 6 years for your flocks, and you changed my wages 10 times. 10 times in the 14 years. Changed my wages. Laban gave him whatever he wanted to give him. Verse 42, if the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had not been with me, you would surely have sent me away empty-handed. But God has seen my hardship and the toil of my hands, and last night he rebuked you. Now I love this. Jacob knew that Laban had intended to catch up with him and kill him, possibly worse. Not because he stole the gods, but because Laban suffered narcissistic injury because he lost. He lost control of Jacob. Jacob had become powerful. Jacob was blessed by God. Jacob had his wives. Jacob now can start his own family, and Laban hated this. Narcissists hate it when somebody they come in contact with, somebody who they bring into their lives, and somebody who serves them well. And Jacob served Laban very well. Laban became rich because of Jacob. And now Jacob was going to leave, and Laban was furious. How dare you leave me? Narcissists treat you like that. They mistreat you when you're there, but still expect you to serve them and treat them. And then when you finally leave, they can't handle it because their control is shattered. And that is the reason Laban chased after Jacob. Verse 43. Laban answered, verse 43, and said this, the women, and this right here, by the way, is the narcissistic mentality. This is what Laban is about to share with you and me, how narcissists think and why they rage. Verse 43, Laban answered Jacob, the women are my daughters. Huh? Do you see that? That's the first thing out of his mouth. The women are my daughters. I don't care if I gave them away in marriage. I don't care if you worked 14 years for me for them. They're my daughters. Now, how many of you can say right now, yep, that sounds like a narcissist. Yep, that's mine. It's mine. This is the narcissist mentality. Those women are my daughters. Now, watch this. Watch this. It gets worse. The narcissism gets even worse. The women are my daughters. The children are my children. What? Laban is saying, your children are my children. Why would he be saying that? He's saying this because in a narcissist's mind, since the daughters belong to him, the daughters are mine, therefore what comes out of them is mine. You know, it's interesting. I have to say this. I have to bring this up. And it blew my mind when I dealt in my own personal life with my in-laws. And some of the tactics and some of the words that I heard out of their mouths, which just dumbfounded me. One of them was their rejection of me as a husband and as a father in my own family. What they referred to my wife as was their half sister, their sister. Even though she's only a half sister, it's their sister. And I used to read comments that they would say, my sister, my sister. Never my wife, but to them, it's my sister. When I had children, one of the things that bothered me and scared me was they would always refer to them as my niece, my nephew. This is the attitude of narcissists. It's mine. It's all mine. It's my niece, my nephew. And this is what we see with Labon in verse 43. Labon answered, the women are my daughters, those children are my children, and the flocks are my flocks. All you see is mine. Wow. Boom, mind blown. I could imagine Jacob's face in that moment, witnessing the delusion, the self-deception, not even having the word narcissist to go by like you and I do, but his mind just blown of, really? The daughters that you gave me, you promised me if I work for 14 years, I earned them, they're yours? You consider them yours still? And my children, you consider my children yours? And the flocks that I worked so hard, you considered all yours? What is wrong with you? How many of you want to say this to narcissists in your life? What is wrong with you? The delusion, the self-deception, it's otherworldly. It makes no sense whatsoever. So Laban's going on his little rant, trying to counter what Jacob said. The women are my daughters. The children are my children. The flocks are my flocks. All you see is mine, blah, blah, blah. Yet, what can I do today about these daughters of mine or about the children they have borne? He snapped out of it. He told Jacob what he thought. Those women, your wives, they're mine. The flocks are mine. The children are mine. But he finally says, but, what can I do about it? Right? What can I do about it? What can I do about it today? What can I do about these daughters of mine or about the children they have borne? Very delusional, Labon is. Verse 44, come now, let's make a covenant, you and I, and let it serve as a witness between us. Verse 45, so Jacob took a stone and set up a pillar. He said to his relatives, gather some stones. So they took stones and piled them in a heap, and they ate there by the heap. Verse 47, Laban called it Jagar Sahadutha, and Jacob called it Galid. Verse 48, Laban said, this heap is a witness between you and me today. That is why it was called Galid. It was also called Mizpah, because he said, may the Lord watch between you and me when we are away from each other. Verse 50, if you mistreat my daughters, or if you take any wives besides my daughters, even though no one is with us, remember that God is a witness between you and me. Verse 51, Laban also said to Jacob, here is this heap, and here is this pillar I have set up between you and me. This heap is a witness, and this pillar is a witness, that I will not go past this heap to your side to harm you, and that you will not go past this heap and pillar to my side to harm me. May the God of Abraham and the God of Nahor and the God of their father judge between us. So Jacob took an oath in the name of the fear of his father Isaac. He offered a sacrifice there in the hill country and invited his relatives to meal. After they had eaten, they had spent the night there. Early the next morning, they left and continued on. And we are going to end it right there. We have just completed chapter 34. Sorry, not 34. Chapter 31. That was part 2. What an amazing, amazing understanding that we are seeing, and how narcissism, again, narcissism is not new. We see this self-deception, this attitude of entitlement in the ancient days. We see that Jacob was up against it. And one of the things that we see that caused Jacob to be up against this was him not knowing himself nor his boundaries. So this is why Jacob stayed in that horrible situation for 14 plus years, 20 years. Jacob was in a relationship with a horrible narcissist, not the wives, but Labon. As Labon mistreated him, as Labon changed wages on him, as Labon made him stay outside in the scorching heat, not offering him shade, as Labon didn't offer any warmth for him in the cold of nights. Yet Jacob stayed because Jacob had not yet developed boundaries. Much like you and me when we are involved with narcissists. It wasn't until the Lord spoke to Jacob and said, now is the time to go. You've seen enough. You've been through enough. You've learned enough about the self-deception of Labon. Now get your wives and go, and I will protect you. And some of us, you and me, need to listen when the Lord is saying this. Get up and go. Take nothing that doesn't belong to you, right? Again, the two things is to avoid strife. It's better to avoid strife than to settle in contention. And two, make sure you have your own means. Jacob left only with what belonged to him. Okay. Now we do know that one of his wives, Rachel, she's a little bit of she's very much a mischief one. She has a lot of elements of her father Laban in her. All right. She did in fact steal her father's toys or whatever they were, or God's wooden things. But as we found out, to a narcissist, that's not even the real reason that he pursued anyways, right? It's a foolish thing to believe that he was really mad that his gods were taken. He only said that once. It was a little tiny thing. Really what he was mad at is that Jacob left. And this is what causes narcissistic injury, is when we decide that we will no longer allow them to have power and control over our lives. Jacob escaped that. And that is the best thing that we could do. Get away from the situation. All right. And with that, I want to thank you very, very, very much for being a part of Royal We Fellowship. Bless all of you this coming week. And be sure to be subscribed, like, and share this with somebody who may need to hear this. Look out for videos that are going to be coming on the organic Royal We channel. That's the regular Royal We channel. If you would like to support the Royal We Fellowship, please do so by visiting down below in the description box. You can find access to PayPal. I do take donations there. This channel is not monetized in any way, and so there's no ads. I'm not getting any form of any thing from this. So your donations would be appreciated. Again, it's not required, but inspired. Only if you are inspired to see Royal We Fellowship grow and how this can move forward. And I believe that there's a big calling for Royal We Fellowship. I believe that this is going to be a bigger part of the Royal We. My goals and my intentions eventually are to get out from just being online and perhaps going somewhere locally where it could be in person and also still online. But that's something that I'm praying about. And I ask that you, the Royal We Fellowship followers, to join me in prayer with that, to see if God has some more in store for Royal We Fellowship and how it can expand in this new way of going through the scriptures and looking at narcissism, looking at a toxic world. So thank you very much. Kathy asked for a PO box for donations. I don't have that. I just have PayPal. What I may do is reenact Patreon and go through Patreon as well. I'm praying about different methods and different ways that we can do this. Dee, so glad that you are here. Thank you so much. All right. Blessings, everybody. Have a great week. Blessings to you all, and we will see you. Shabbat Shalom. We'll see you next week. Goodbye.